Yeah, our conversation with Jory was so exciting. I think somebody that like really is exploring their identity can also cast a really interesting light on the way that we show up in design and like who we're being when we're making different products. Probably something honestly that most designers don't examine as much as we should. Like we know we have these little bits of bias, but we don't think about them deeply, or we don't like just think about how flexible identity is and how much we're impacting the things that we design because of that perspective. So yeah, I'm intrigued by like listening to somebody's process as they're going through so much personal examination.
I wonder if it can be a little bit like when you're a photographer, you usually are a photographer because you like being behind the camera instead of in front of it.
Mm.
And maybe being a product designer, you can kind of hide from being a user or being the same as the people you design for because, oh, I designed it, so it's different. And you don't have to think about your part on the other side.
Yeah, like obscuring yourself in the research or something. I mean, I think designers are definitely like notorious for having some ego as well. But it's kind of weird that they're synonymous.
But, aside from ego, maybe as a designer, we can view the user as more of a vulnerable position that maybe we don't want to be in.
Oh,
Or like we're so done with the product we're working on that at the time it's done, we're like, okay, that's a product. Like, I don't want to be associated with it anymore.
That too.
I heard something good this week. Someone accidentally used in the conversation that like we don't ship product, we eventually give up on the product. And that's when it ships. And we're like, this is actually very much illustrative because at some point, like the time for industrial design ends, we want or want not, we give up on it and we know we cannot change anything. And like, marketing and all the other people take over and then they're like, yeah, this is the release. And we're like, we gave up on it like so many months ago already.
whoa, that's a crazy process, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, like product, which this was kind of talked about, has this sort of a life cycle, but more than just thinking about it technically, like, oh, it launches and this is how the user takes care of it, and eventually they trash it. It has like an emotional journey, like this is a product, it's exciting and it's new. And then it had all that pre-work that maybe we put into it. So we have different associations about where it is in time and how long it's existed. And product gets dated and maybe has different connotations about it. Society imposes its views and perceptions on it. So those are things that we don't really have control of. And so maybe we don't want to think about like what someone's going to make of our product once we don't have control of it.
Yeah.
We also talked a lot about location. We talked about New York, talked about Maryland, Barcelona, talked about Costa Rica. I feel like locations come up a surprising amount on the pod, like maybe just because it's so relevant to what you do in your life and what you do for a job.
Yeah, it's very location specific.
Harkens back to our first episode of shitting on Ohio.
Oh my God. Yeah.
I mean, I get that someone moved from Barcelona to Baltimore. Even if you're American, the cultural shock is still there.
Oh, yeah.
And the grief.
Yeah, I would grieve that.
Do you guys get much identity out of your like hometown or current spot? I think I'm pretty guilty of that. Like, I almost try to rein it in because I know that being a New Yorker is sort of like it's like a joke that we all are so proud of being New Yorkers. So I do feel that.
We know, Kate, you remind it in every conversation.
This is what I'm saying. So I know that, and I also feel like I try to downplay that it's part of my identity because I know that it's sort of like eye rolly. Do you guys feel strongly about your identity connected to your place?
I think somewhat. I mean, I've obviously been here a very long time and I like it. That probably helps.
Sure. Yeah.
I very much like being from Seattle now, but I don't think it shows up in design work. And I'm also like not hiding that I'm actually like from like Central Eastern Europe, but also again, does it show in the designs? It gives me perspective when I work that I just know the world is bigger and more complicated than what I've seen myself because I've been here and there and I just know that there is more that I don't know.
Yeah.
It doesn't really show that much. No, it's more like I like my identity and like being this Pacific Northwest and like, things you shop and hobbies you have. And I know it's stereotypical, but I love living this Seattle stereotype in a way because I like it. Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
I think it's interesting. Like, do you let yourself be kind of like absorbed in that? And maybe, I guess, assimilate. Do you assimilate into that or do you sort of resist it because of your personal brand for whatever reason? Like, you move somewhere and you actually just don't like it. So you're like, I refuse to be like this place or like, I don't know, having a non-romanticized view of where you are and saying, I'm not gonna fall to these bad things I don't like. I don't know.
I mean, that seems harsh. I mean, I'm so sorry, Margaret. I feel like I'm a little resistant to the tech side of both Seattle and San Francisco. Like, I definitely don't like go into that side of thinking maybe as much.
Spoken like an old school Seattleite.
I guess so. Wow, do I get that identity now too? Amazing. Yeah, but it was interesting to hear Joey talk about how that influences their work and yeah, and the choices that like I don't know, we should still be able to make as designers to live wherever serves our life the best, without this industry like limiting us too much.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Beyond Ray. We're super excited to bring a conversation with Joey Zeledón. I had the pleasure of watching Joey talk at the International Design Conference in New York City, and it was such a great talk about identity and design and how it affects the products we make. So it felt just imperative to bring them onto the podcast today. So Joey is a consultant, just started their consultancy this past year, right? Working with all kinds of brands like OXO, Google, HP, to name a few. And why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, no, thanks, Ginger, for the nice intro, and to you all for having me on this this lovely podcast. Where should I begin? There's so much to say.
Definitely. Let's walk back in time, maybe a little bit about your design journey, because you weren't always a consultant, so there was some time spent in-house design. So let's go through maybe a little resume rundown.
Yeah, so let's actually start in the third grade. No,
Yeah.
no, no.
It was a stormy day when I got born.
That's true.
Or how does it David Copperfield start?
I say that because for as long as I can remember, I always wanted to be a shoe designer.
Oh, cool.
Since I was like, I want to say 8 years old or something. I was just fascinated and obsessed with shoes and sneakers, footwear of all kinds. And that was kind of my entry point into understanding industrial design. Or, I mean, I didn't know of it as industrial design then, right? I just knew that I figured someone somewhere is getting paid to create these things, right? That are sold on a vertical wall, displayed almost like idols.
Mm-hmm.
And that was such a funny contrast because they're things that we just put on our feet, which are more often than not smelly and sweaty, and they interact with, the dirty floors and ground. And yet they're kind of this artifact that's worshipped in our culture, right? Our consumerist culture. I didn't think of it that eloquently at that age, but I think I was just kind of following my intuition, and you know how kids are. And so I spent a lot of time drawing shoes and making my own designs.
Did any of them have like superpowers? I just have to ask. You were young. Did any of them do something really wild, like hover or like, nah, not that crazy? Okay.
Not that crazy. I was just
So
kind of like,
practical.
maybe there were like characters and stuff, but like nothing that wild,
Okay. Yeah.
But in any case, I think I was in middle school, 14 or so, when I was visiting my uncle in San Francisco, and he asked me, what do I want to be when I grow up, or what do I want to study in school, actually? And I said, I don't know. I just know I want to be a shoe designer, and work for Nike, right? And he said, oh, let's go on their website and see what kind of degree they require. And sure enough, it said product design at the time, I think, which is, we know, kind of evolved since then. And this was in the 90s. Right then and there at 14, I was like, okay, I guess that's what I'm studying.
Oh.
Yeah, I had a very one-track mind. And so I ended up studying at RIT, and it's Rochester Institute of Technology in upstate New York. And I'm from actually the Albany area, a small city called Schenectady, New York.
I know it. I'm a New Yorker.
Really?
I know that
You've heard
state. Yeah, I have.
Stop bragging.
No way. Where are you from?
I have to let Joey know. Well, I'm from the Bronx, but
cool.
I have like family all over upstate. So yeah, cool.
I've never heard of the Bronx, but no. But Schenectady is a big deal.
Yeah.
No, it's cool. I mean, it's got General Electric. That was its claim to fame, and Thomas Edison kind of did his, got his start there. So yeah, the state of New York is really big and a lot of cool things.
Yeah, more than just New York City.
Yeah,
Much more.
although New York City is pretty great. Yeah, let's see, where was I going with that? Oh, so I studied, yeah, at RIT, and that was actually the only school I applied to, funny enough. And coming back to like having one track mind and just being decisive, I went to a portfolio review day when I was a senior in high school, and I was taking AP drawing. So that's advanced placement drawing, because I was good at drawing and I loved art and I wanted to be a shoe designer. Easy peasy. And so I went to the thing and I asked my art teacher, can you recommend a school? Where do you think I would fit? And she said, I could really see you at RIT. I was like, okay, that's weird. Why do you say that? Now I kind of know why she said that, because it's a super nerdy school. And like in hindsight, looking back, that's probably why. And she didn't like point me to some like fancy art school or like, where the cool art kids go, I guess. So I went to the school where there's a lot of computer science geeks and stuff. But I was a good fit, so I was really happy with that. But in any case, I stood in line, waited, and it went really well with RIT. I think I got early acceptance, and then I waited in line for Syracuse University. It was my second one, and I was next in line. And then they were like rang the bell, and it was time to go. So we all hopped on the bus, and I was like, "Well, I guess we're gonna do RIT."
Guess I'm going RIT. Wow.
Yeah, there's a lot of that in my journey, not all the time. So I go to RIT, try to have every project that I work on focused on shoe design, but in hindsight, most of the non-shoe projects ended up being my favorites, because they were the ones that I learned the most from and really developed an appreciation and a newfound interest in storytelling and kind of the space beyond the stuff, the artifacts we design as industrial designers, and realizing that that's where the meaning is. The meaning is around it in the context, whether it's the people and the places. And then the things are the props in the larger theater, where the stories are told. And I always love to think about design that way, and not just things on pedestals and things that go in museums. And so, yeah, let's see, I had 2 internships while I was at RIT. One was with Clark's in Boston, and then the other one was with New Balance, also in Boston. So I got a taste of 2 different sides of the shoe world.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Athletic and dad shoes, and then Clark's was like, ultra comfortable. Like, it had some cool stuff with the Clark's originals. I'll give it some street cred, let's say. But it was a good experience. In any case, I ended up getting a job offer with Clark's as my first job out of school. That's where I began my career. And so I fulfilled my dream to be a shoe designer. I didn't work at Nike, but Clark's was an amazing place. I really appreciated that opportunity. And I was just there for like a year and a half or so. And then I got a job with Design Continuum, also in Boston, which is a design firm. That was a pretty big pivot to make. And I'm so happy and fortunate. Like, I feel very fortunate that I had that happen to me. Like, I had that opportunity, because I think it really set the trajectory for what was to come down the road, let's say. And the reason why I made that decision, am I going too detailed?
I was just going to ask you, why did you make that decision to depart?
Yeah, so I made that decision because within the span of a year and a half, I designed like, I can't even tell you how many shoes. And I realized, wow, like the shoe projects where all design students and young shoe designers want to work on, the like reinvent a shoe and all these things, like that only happens every once in a while. Everything else is like, you make like line extensions and seasonal updates, and yeah, you design shoes, but like, so what is it really doing? Just more shoes? Maybe it was existential, what I was thinking about. And like, I started wondering, like, how many more shoes can I design before I start to become numb to it and like it loses meaning, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I also was scared of being typecast into just one category, because I had heard about that. Like, if you stay in any one industry long enough, it becomes harder to diversify. Those are the 2 reasons, really. And so that's why I decided to revisit my portfolio at the time and apply to a bunch of design firms so I could get more diversity of projects in other categories. Because like, I wanted to be a good shoe designer, but I realized I wanted to just be a good designer, and work towards that and not be limited. That is to say, like, there's plenty of people who become shoe designers and they're a shoe designer, amazing shoe designers throughout their careers. And that's fabulous. That's a wonderful path as well. And there's not one is better or worse, and it's just what I felt at the time.
Yeah, the like balance between specialization or like variety is an interesting choice, I think, for lots of designers, even just because then you're choosing like in-house or consultant and all that too. But it seems like a really good fit for you. You seem to like to pull ideas from a lot of different places and continue to be
Absolutely.
stimulated by new ideas. Yeah.
Exactly. I like to find commonalities between very opposing, categories or things, because I really believe everything is connected one way or another. And I think we can talk more about it later on this episode. I'm obsessed with mashups, right?
Mm.
And mashups are inherently kind of this blending of two completely different worlds, right? And it's also very much related to me being trans,
Mm.
right? And it's very rich, and that area is what I'm kind of focused on now and what I'm really excited about.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, was there a point where you knew, because you've had like a decently long career at this point, mid-length, I guess we'd say, and then you've stepped into doing your own consulting, sort of formulating your own design vision and brand. When did you know you were going to work for yourself?
That's a great question. I think probably, I don't know, I would say like 6 months before starting it.
Oh, okay.
But like when I was sure I was going to do that, I always knew, like, and it was kind of buried deep within me that I wanted to go off on my own in some capacity. It always felt so foreign. It felt so like hidden. It was a mystery. Like, how does one do that?
Right.
How can anyone afford to do that? Where are you going to find work? It took some like kind of demystifying it for myself, but also I think it really took, for lack of a better way of saying this, I had to hit rock bottom,
Mm.
meaning my ego needed to be stripped away in order to kind of take that plunge, because it's to go off on your own, I think, and it's different for everyone, right? But at least for me, you have to stand on your own. You can't stand behind someone else's brand or another company and say, I'm Joey, designer at XYZ company, or I'm studying at Harvard University, right? Anything that has a brand that people associate, like they build their identities around that. And I think we all do it
Yeah.
to a certain extent. And suddenly when that goes away, it's like, oh, wait, who am I? What's the point of my life? What am I doing? And I think people have kind of crises when that happens, at different points in their lives, for better or for worse.
When you're stripped from those brands and identities that are well recognized by our like design environment, does it make your work becoming more authentic, and does it make you rethink who you really are as a designer?
It can, and I think it helped me do that. Well, not only did I strip away like my title and the company I worked for, of course, I always had like, my trajectory behind me. I can say, oh, I used to work for whatever company if I wanted an ego boost and feel like I'm not just floating in space.
Mm.
But I also moved to a city whose brand is, it's nothing fancy, let's say. It's not like a top tier city, right? Because I think people find their identities through location too, because everything has a brand to it. We know that as designers, and we have our own brands, and everything is branded. It's crazy to think that way, but it's absolutely true.
Mhm.
But I live in Baltimore now. In Baltimore, well, it's not only just kind of neutral and no one knows it, like Schenectady. you know, Baltimore, its brand is like almost on the other side of things, where it's struggling to redefine itself, because when people think of Baltimore, they think of The Wire, that TV show, and there, The Wire there's a lot of truth to that show and accuracy, and it's pretty authentic, and that's one facet of Baltimore only. But for better or for worse, that's how the world sees Baltimore. And so, anyways, my point being is that like I moved from working in Barcelona to, Baltimore for a couple of reasons too, because my partner was here and we were long distance. We needed to be together, and the pandemic happened, right? So that was really hard, and I think everyone reevaluated their lives, right,
Mhm.
in different ways depending on your age and where you were in your life and career. And I think also, like, I was at HP at the time, and it was an amazing experience. I was there for like 2.5 years in Barcelona, and I don't know, my soul was like crying out. I was like, what are you doing? I was having a hard time even just getting through meetings. I was just like, why am I here? What is the point of this? I couldn't like run away from it. Like I couldn't breathe somehow. It was like a physiological reaction it's like my soul was causing this almost allergic reaction to uh, being an employee at a company, and maybe HP is also, it's a massive like company. And so I think that in a way kind of helped initiate those feelings as well. Because sometimes when you're a large company like that, you can feel, you're closer to the grind and the harsh nature, the harsh
You're like
realities of
in the
like,
machine.
And the machine, exactly. Nothing against HP, like, but that's just the way it is, right?
Yeah.
And so it's very visceral, that feeling, as opposed to being in like a cute, cozy little design firm where you're kind of shielded from that feeling.
Mm.
And so if I was in that context in Barcelona, it might have been a little different. But I think things happen for a reason.
Yeah, I was about to ask, like, when you have this feeling of like, I can't be at this workplace anymore, and in this case, like a large in-house outfit, how do you decide, like, I have to stake out for myself and do my own thing versus thinking the solution would be to go to a consultancy, maybe a smaller place,
Yeah.
just to not feel like you're in the machine.
Yeah.
But how do you decide to like leapfrog over that and go to this more extreme version where you're working on your own?
That's a great question. I pressure tested myself on that too. And I kept asking myself, like, okay, if I could pick any company in the world to work for, who would it be? And I was just thinking of all the usual suspects. I don't know. I don't even know where kids these days want to work. I was like, what's cool anymore? I don't even, like Google, is Google cool? But that was cool for a decade, I feel like. But maybe, Gen Z is like, that's stupid.
I don't know. I mean, I think what's special is like kind of that it's different for every person. But yeah.
Yeah.
So for
right.
you, you're like evaluating this.
Yeah, that's right. It's different for everyone. And I'm glad you said that. That's absolutely true. But yeah, like I was just whatever was going to feed my ego in that moment, right? I was just trying to think, oh, would it be cool if I said, oh, I'm Joey, I work at Google or whatever company, right? And I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't, like, nothing stuck. I was like, no, like, this doesn't feel right. I had no motivation, no drive to make any of that happen. Right. But before, every step along the way, I was like driven. I was like, yeah, I want to work at that company. I want to work with this company, for different reasons. And I worked towards that. And that was interesting too. If we kind of circle back to being so decisive on, I want to be a shoe designer, I'm going to go do that. And I went and did that. I want to study design at RIT. And I went and did that. I didn't exhaust all of my options, right?
Mm.
I just kind of was decisive. And I have a lot of cases of doing that throughout my career and life. But this was like a time when I just couldn't figure it out. It wasn't so clear.
It sounds disorienting. Like, as somebody who's generally doesn't need to even maybe take a super long time to evaluate a bunch of options, like that's a really new side of your thinking that showed up, right? So I hear you
It
about,
is.
yeah, it feeling like a low. But then you had to also, at some point, right, gain enough confidence to believe in your capacity to do this. So what's that shift like, where you start being like, okay, this feels crazy. I feel a little different than I normally feel, but something starts coalescing towards the step that you ultimately do take. Was it like a clear moment like that, or was it sort of just starting to pick up projects?
I think it wasn't so clear. Yeah, it was kind of drawn out. I want to say that I'm a hyper intuitive person, so I make pros and cons lists, but at the end of the day, I always make decisions based on gut feel.
That's great.
And I think that's helped me at different points in my career. But I think what it was, there was this tension because I almost didn't want to. I don't know. It's like I was resisting somehow, but my intuition, I think, was leading me to what I'm doing now. But there was kind of an internal struggle going on. In any case, I think part of the deal here was, well, and why Baltimore too. My partner is studying to get her doctorate at Johns Hopkins University, and she also works. She's doing that part time while she's working full time at a company in DC, and that's what brought her here. And she was selling me on Baltimore for doing my own thing, and she said she would support me, like financially and emotionally in every which way. And she's amazing. And I couldn't be doing this without her. Martell Esposito is her name. And yeah, she's awesome. And the smartest person I know. And I could not be doing this without her. So she was a big reason for why I'm in Baltimore, to be with her. We have a life together. And she's helped me work through a lot of this stuff with my career. She helps me tremendously. Yeah, that's kind of what brought me here. And so also, I should say, I skipped over, like, we went from continuum to now here. I diverged in my career. Like, I always map it against the design process, right? Where we go wide and diverge and then eventually converge on something. So I tried to diverge as much as I could to get a breadth of experiences to now be able to draw on in my work. And so after continuum, I actually spent a year in Costa Rica. I quit my job at Continuum. So actually, there was another couple little details that I wanted to work in. Because I was at Continuum for 4 years. It was during the Great Recession. They had rounds of layoffs. I felt like I was like kind of biding my time and like just surviving and not thriving. And so this was in 2011, and just moved to Costa Rica unemployed, and just wanted to not live in fear and just exist and live life, and that's what I did, and something I always wanted to do, and spend time with family and brushed up on my Spanish. And so that was a wonderful thing. And I think that actually planted the seed for being able to do what I did this time around. That was my first experience unraveling these layers of ego and kind of false identity, let's say, right? Of Joey, designer at XYZ company, and being in a new culture where people had no idea what Continuum was. And I don't think even knew what Clark's was. I might have mentioned New Balance.
Sounds grounding.
Yeah, I said New Balance at one point. They're like, "Oh, New Balance." And I was like, "Oh, there we go." Ego is fed.
Yeah, I think it's super important what you just said, and I think we touched on it in previous episodes as well. Like basically leaving your well-recognized job and like leaving your design career for a while and moving somewhere else, doing something different, doesn't mean that you stop being designer and you lose the credibility and that you don't know what you're doing. Jackie was struggling with it when she left her career to be a full-time mom, and she was basically almost ashamed to admit that she took time off to drive around Walmart and do typical household duties instead of pushing for her career. And then she came back and it didn't change her. Like taking pause didn't change her skills. And I think it's super critical to remind ourselves that like, hey, you need a break, you can take a break. It doesn't mean that if you pause in this career for a moment, because it's like developing so fast and trends are changing, and like every now and then we have new most popular person, you can take a break and you can come back, and probably you'll be even better if you just let yourself rest.
Better perspective, maybe, right? Like you have the same skills, but you might have identified the direction you're trying to head in a more concrete way.
That's right. I love that. That was the big takeaway for having that year abroad, was kind of absorbing those feelings of, oh, these feelings are new. Like this is like stepping out of the rat race and being in a new culture where when people introduce themselves, or like whenever I met anyone new, they never asked me, oh, where do you work or what do you do? They were like, oh, who's your family? Where are you from? And it never came up. And so that was really nice. That was like, oh wow, this is different.
It must be refreshing.
It was jarring at first because like the capitalist mindset, ingrained in me was like, oh, this is like, I want to talk about my job. I want to talk about how cool.
You want some credit, right? You're like, oh, I worked so hard to get this job. Like, notice this. Yeah. Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. So that's why that was so critical. And I'm so glad I did that. In any case, I wanted to get back in the rat race. So I ended up getting a job at Smart Design in New York City and moved from Costa Rica to New York City. Was there for 4 years, yada, yada, yada. I mentioned the bisque. And then I got recruited by Steelcase to be a furniture designer in their healthcare category. So,
oh, interesting.
Yeah. And so I moved to Grand Rapids, Michigan, of all places, the Midwest. I moved out west, kind of. And that was a bit of reverse culture shock because it's like still in the US, but yet I wasn't expecting kind of, I don't know, it was just different, because I'm like Northeastern person. And so I just wasn't expecting kind of the cultural differences just snuck up on me. And it's hard to articulate what those are even.
We'll say those subtle Michigan sensibilities.
Yeah, and it's very subtle. And that's why it's hard to even to say what it is. But in any case, that was a good experience. I never designed furniture before except for my coat check chair, hanger chair. And I was like, why did you guys hire me? And they were like, well, we kind of wanted something different. I don't know. They were looking for like, I had come from like, smart design and strategy and stuff. So they were looking for other types of thinking beyond just furniture. And then I had been like fostering this relationship with the folks at HP because there was this opportunity in Barcelona. I was like, oh, I guess Barcelona, whatever, but nada. It was always been my dream to live and work in Barcelona as a designer. And so I really had to hustle to make that one happen. It worked out, and I feel really grateful to have had that experience. And that brings us back to present day, right? So let's see, where was I? Where did I leave off before?
It's okay if the chronology is like a background of this.
Let's get to the juicy part, right? So this is the nuts and bolts of the whole show. Yeah, so I think really dismantling of my ego, stripping back the layers. Suddenly I don't stand behind another company. I don't reside in like a sexy locale. right?
Mm.
Of like Barcelona, New York, whatever, Seattle, these places that people want to, want to move to. And so that took some adjusting, but it was part of the process. It was absolutely critical. Like it happened for a reason. Like I was meant to be in Baltimore. Why I love Baltimore is because it's kind of void of ego. The people I've met here. So some of the most authentic people I've ever met, because you can't find your identity. And well, you can. Like Baltimore has its own identity, right? But like people here are just themselves, and these are generalizations, right? From my experience so far, anyways. And I think that's been really refreshing for me, and especially a really great kind of backdrop and context for me in trying to find myself. These past 2 years, because I've been doing this now for just over 2 years since I
Mm.
moved here. The first year was really hard. I really felt lost, and really I was in a dark place, I would say. I didn't know what I was doing. I touched on this in my talk in New York City at IDC, right? It's interesting when you kind of like turn down the noise and all the distraction, the background noise, you're almost forced to hear your own thoughts. And that's kind of what happened. And I think that was what I was, in a way, trying to drown out, and run away from. In a way, I needed my career to just crumble in my head, even though it wasn't actually crumbling, right? But like to me, I was like, oh my God, what am I even doing? Why am I a designer? Do I even want to be a
Mm.
designer anymore? I was contemplating going back to school for music. I was thinking, oh, maybe I just want to get a job at a bookstore, or I don't know, even work at Starbucks. Fuck it.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like, I don't give a shit, just like tired of, I don't know,
Career
being a
carrying so much weight, maybe. Yeah, like trying to
yeah,
strip it all down again. Yeah.
because I just didn't know why I was designing. I didn't have any purpose. I just like, I don't want to, I just kept seeing everything that I've designed and everything that I could design. I'm thinking, oh, just more tchotchkes and junk. Like, I was like repulsed by it. It just grossed me out. I was like,
Mm.
what have I been doing with my life? What is that even, who gives a shit? Yeah, you could call it like a midlife crisis.
When you kind of turned a corner on this in your career and starting your own consultancy, do you feel like you actually look back on the same work that you were a little disdainful towards in a better light? Is it a bit of a mindset shift?
It is. It is. Yeah. I'm not. I'm not all doom and gloom as much, as before, but I am still very critical. And what I was missing was like my own identity, going back to like who I am truly, and that was almost crying out for
Mm.
self acceptance. It was like my true self was dragging me, along, my ego along, let's say, and I think that was the fight. It was like my ego self, I guess, was battling with my true self, my true nature, and my career and this whole identity around being a designer was getting in the way of it all.
Do you think that would happen to like any profession, or do you think that it's like much more likely in a creative profession? Like, did you feel like your work was woven into your identity in a way that is specific?
I don't know for certain, but like my gut tells me, I think it is unique in, us as designers, and like we do find quite a bit of our identity and who we are as designers and what we design. Cause like, I don't think it's really just a job. It's never really been just a job for most designers, right? Maybe the smart ones, the ones who do it right and have the right kind of balance. No, I don't know. But yeah, I think it was a blessing and a curse, really, to always find purpose and meaning in my life through my work. So that's great, because it's always like everyone wants that. And people would always tell me, oh, wow, you're so lucky. You're so passionate about what you do. And I was like, yeah, you're right. That's pretty great. I do love what I do. I get paid to like draw and think, create new ideas and stuff. That's awesome. But then when that gets in the way of who you really are and who you've never really gotten to be, it was almost like it was laying dormant my whole life, my true identity. And when I say that, like me being trans, and it's that's hard. And maybe it's generational too, right? Every generation has a different relationship with these kinds of things, I would imagine. I don't want to speak for anyone else, because when I look at like Gen Z and the younger generation, I mean, there's so much more acceptance compared to when I was younger. That's not to say that it's any easier. It's still really hard, a hard path, regardless of when you're trans. But I think for me, growing up in the 90s and early 2000s, I was born in 1984, so I'm 39. So I'm an elder millennial, I guess. or exennial, if you want to be mean.
Is that a word? Oh my
Yeah,
gosh, I
it
didn't even
is.
know that one.
I don't think you're exennial until it's like 81, 80.
Oh,
No.
really? Okay. Well, that's very nice of you to say. But I do, it's funny, I do have like some things about Gen X make me all warm and fuzzy because I was like I always looked up to Gen X, you know, growing up. I was like, wow, they're so cool. And like Daria and what was the other one? Reality Bites, you know. I don't know if you know that movie.
I don't. I'm too young. I don't know it.
Oh, really?
Shit. No.
Oh my God. Okay, well, I'm really
We'll
dating
put it in
myself.
our show notes. We'll update our listeners to
You have
get
no idea what you were
advice.
missing,
I
okay?
can't wait to go find out. Absolutely.
Yeah, let's see. So, oh right, yeah. So I was, yeah, so like growing up in that time, like the idea of being trans, like there was people called it pretty gross things back then, you know, and the only trans people that I ever came across were, you know, represented terribly in media and pop culture, you know.
Mhm.
So it's like, so during my formative years, like the concept of being trans was like kind of this, it was like it was gross, you know, it was presented as this like just just a gross thing, a gross existence. It's like what a freak, you know. And
Yeah.
so that got ingrained in me throughout those formative years. And because of that, I think I struggle with the internalized transphobia
Mm.
quite a bit. And so that's a lifelong, you know, process of kind of dismantling that and working through it. If you have questions about this, like I'm an open book, you know, so
Yeah.
I want you all to feel comfortable asking me anything really.
I'd like to understand, when do you start understanding that this angst you're feeling towards work and who you are professionally is actually a deeper journey that you have to go through? And how do you start like unraveling that thread to realize this is not really about work? This is about like my values, my identity, you know, a more core thing.
It almost like it just came like a flood, you know, of emotion one day. And this is right around the time when I was like really hitting a low point and kind of a dark place. And like, why am I doing this? Why am I in Baltimore? And, you know, my partner just put up with me being a real, real downer. I don't want to go into details about it, but you can imagine.
Yeah.
And I was just like, fuck it. You know what? If I have to be in Baltimore unemployed, I kept telling myself I'm unemployed. You know, it's like, I think that is a psychological thing when you're on doing your own thing. You sometimes it sneaks up on me. I'm thinking to myself, man, I guess I'm kind of unemployed in a way. You know, it's a weird concept, a weird phenomenon that plays tricks on you, you know, because I was so used to working for other people's companies for 15 plus years that to do anything different was sort of, it's a hard one to explain, but that was just kind of another thing like to throw on the pile of despair and self-loathing. But anyways, one day I was like, you know what, fuck it, if I have to be in Baltimore and just kind of work on design projects that I didn't know why I was working on them necessarily. Like I needed to make money. I needed to just keep trusting the process, like something will come. But I was missing kind of the driver, right? The purpose of like why I'm doing this. But I figured, you know what? I got nothing else to lose. I'm just gonna, you know, I told my partner like my whole thing, you know, it's kind of like coming out to myself and coming out to her. But I should say, like, I had told her kind of about it years ago when we were first dating, but nothing to this extent, you know. It was sort of because I didn't fully understand it. But that's I think this time around was like the whole thing because I think it was much more like present and the movement has been
Right.
slowly but surely growing and becoming like getting the attention it deserves for better or for worse. And so there was a lot of education for myself. I was learning about it and like started seeing it for myself through a different lens. Like, oh, maybe I'm not a freak. Maybe this is, oh, they have all this new terminology, you know? Oh, wow, gender fluid and non-binary. And what does this mean, you know? And gender queer. And I was kind of reading all about it. And it was like, wow, this sounds so much more palatable. Someone really designed this, you know? They were thinking about the audience here. And I think that helped too, you know? Like, it's almost like there wasn't the lexicon and the acceptance and the community wasn't really there for me in the education when I was younger to like put a name to the feelings.
Yeah, so it sounds like it was maybe critical to have some of this support directly with other people or through the work that others have done in like other communities, right?
Yeah, and YouTube videos and seeing, you know, other trans people, particularly like trans femme and trans women and gender fluid people tell their stories. And so then I can start to like compare notes, you know, and say, huh, this sounds like me or this doesn't sound like me. And why is this, and I essentially did spend like a whole year researching, just so fascinated by it all, because it also made me feel happy, like euphoric, and it was like really exciting at the same time. It's almost like going through a second puberty. That's what they call it, where I never really got to, like, my puberty was full of like shame and
Mm.
just self-loathing, because it is its own, at least for myself, like I can't speak for everyone else, but like I feel like it's its own category of existence, in many different aspects, in gender identity and sexuality. Yeah, I just never really felt like I fit into kind of the binary worlds, growing up. So I didn't go to prom, let's just say that.
This is a very low
You're in
bar
good
example.
company, yeah.
Okay. So getting back to so like I hit rock bottom, and then I was like, oh, it was almost like I really needed to find myself in that place, because I just started flowing out of me. I told my partner, and she's amazing. She was like, didn't bat an eye. When I was first explaining it to her, because I didn't actually put a label on it, she was like, I think you might be trans. And she said, I always suspected you might be. And I was like, really? Like, why didn't you tell me? Maybe it could have helped me, I don't know, discover this sooner. But she was like, oh, I don't know, I didn't think anything of it. Like, it was like whatever. I was like, okay. And it was all, I think I spent a long time with her, telling her my feelings, and we would research together and figure out the names of these things and why, and kind of place it. And then I would always like kind of like look at her like, are you okay? Like, how are you feeling? Because I was feeling guilty. I was feeling like, why do you still love me? Why are we, I felt like I was betraying her, and like, because there's these narratives, that you kind of absorb, and that you hear about. And so, yeah, I don't know. It was a lot for me to unpack, but I think that was like the internalized transphobia, like rearing its head, and I was just starting to, it was like the tip of the iceberg. But I'm one of the lucky ones, because I have a supportive partner, and it's incredible.
It's so cool that she was there to keep confirming for you that you're, not doing anything wrong, that's like a great choice and that she's on board. Yeah. That sounds really healthy.
It was amazing. Like, self-acceptance is one, it's like the first step, but then self-love and like celebration, the next, right?
Hmm.
It's been an incredible thing. I actually went, when we were just starting out, when I was like, and I would just not shut up. I got so annoying. Like, I was annoying myself, and I think I was annoying her, because I would just like, oh, and another thing, like, can you believe it? Like,
I feel like your enthusiasm must have been kind of awesome to be around too, though. Like somebody who's
yeah,
just learning that much about themselves is exciting. Yeah.
yeah, it was really cool. I had a point where I was like euphoric for like 3 days straight, where it was like almost vibrating. It was almost unsettling. Like, I couldn't calm down. I was like, what's happening to me? I was like, there has to be a term for it, but I'm pretty sure it must be like hyper euphoria or something. I'm just making it up, but it was just like crazy. I've never felt that before.
And it was just so much understanding that you were knowing who you were, or that you were seeing other people that had a similar experience, or what was sort of like.
It was just like getting to accept myself, and getting to talk to someone about it.
Mm.
I think it was just my system was in shock. My whole life it was just buried, and it was something that it's like, oh, I don't want to think of myself that way. I was like really ashamed of it.
Mm-hmm.
And with the euphoria and all the discoveries, the passion and love for design came back as well, right?
It did. Yeah. Thank you for saying that. And that's been the most beautiful thing, is like, now I'm like, I can't wait to design again. Like, I'm like, what can I do now with this new, now that I'm like my full self, I feel like, I don't know, there's so much I want to do with this, in a way that's authentic, and helps people. It's so much more than just design on its own. And it kind of comes back to that love of storytelling that I talked about earlier, like the meaning of the intangibles. The intangibles bring meaning to the tangibles, if that makes sense.
Can you dive in a little bit more, maybe?
Meaning, and I do this a lot now, I design with words, right? I design first with words, and then I try to embody the narratives, right? Stories with the things I design. And so, for example, like trans identity and my trans experience, that's one story, and it's an interesting thing that I can tap into, that experience, the lived experience, that now I can find ways to embody that in the things that I design, right? Whether it's designing for other trans people like me, or I don't know what, right? Like finding commonalities between being trans and the design process. And I kind of touched on this a little bit in my talk Beyond the Black Turtleneck, as like I was drawing parallels between my experience as a trans person and and kind of looking at trans as like, well, it's transformation, right? It's you transition, and that's what we do as designers. We're constantly manipulating the status quo, and kind of we don't take things for face value. We break things apart and rearrange them, and we do a lot of mashups. And I've always thought of myself as a mashup, right? And I think mashups are interesting, where usually with mashups you can see both parts kind of retrofitted together, where it's not a blend and it turns into like one whole new thing, but it's like two things that are, you can kind of see both parts sort of connected in a way. It's a little abstract what I'm talking about here. And I'm still like, I'm in the process of working through all of this and trying to figure out where it's leading. But let me just say this, I'm actually working on another book about this. And it's essentially taking my IDC talk and kind of running with that comparison between trans and being trans, and different interesting moments in transitioning as a trans person, like being transgender, in the transition, in just in the overall experience of even self-acceptance and our transformation. And sometimes we transition one way and then we transition another way all within a day and then back again, if you're gender fluid,
Mhm.
which does happen to me, and it can be confusing. I feel like there's so many parallels to be drawn between the trans experience and the design experience, right? And I think that's what I'm really excited about digging into more. Right now, I'm in the process of just trying to build my community, and trying to find more trans designers to talk to and learn their experiences, and just learn more about kind of the broader spectrum, of the community. And because it's not a monolith, right? I think there's so many other facets to it and people to learn from, that it's just really exciting, for me to, now that I've accepted myself and now that I'm working towards like self celebration, I'm just so excited to like meet other people like me, and or that we're from similar community, and just try to learn from their struggle. And at the end of the day, all I want to do is turn my pain and shame into like something useful and something that can help people, whether it turns into a manufactured product design. I like, at this point, I don't care, like, call it industrial design or call it, if it ends up being a book, I guess that's a product too. But I guess at this point, I'm happy to be using all of the things I've learned as a designer, design process and methodology, to tell new stories, and using my story, my personal story, with that and along the way.
I hear you calling it pain and shame, but it's a perspective. It's like, it's your perspective that nobody else has, right? So this is why
Yeah.
it sort of is a superpower for you to be able to harness and tell all the rest of us that are not trans what we're missing about products or the design experience, or what it means to have your identity shift back and forth in a day, and like how that impacts the thing that you want to make, right?
Yeah.
I didn't hear your talk, but if you feel like you can tell us more about how you feel like identity plays into design now for you, or like what is the same as it was before, what's changed since you've gotten to know yourself better. I'm really interested in that.
I don't have all the answers yet. You're catching me like mid-flight,
Of course.
so, well, I think it's interesting. The things that we design have identities, right? So, perfect example. Well, I used this example in my IDC talk. That printer that I worked on for HP. So they were looking to embed printing technology into furniture archetypes as a way to blend better into people's workspaces, whether it's in their home office or small studio. And, the furniture archetype was a great vehicle to do this. Like printers, talk about identity that you want to transition away from. Like printers are just like a lot of things we design as industrial designers, like the categories are very mundane, right? And neutral, whatever it might be. But a printer is like, we have almost this hatred towards printers, even in like,
Office Space comes
yeah,
to mind.
exactly. That's right. And I mentioned that. Oh, so Office Space.
I've seen that one.
Okay, well, that is the 90s. Not, sorry, I was referencing 80s stuff before, so that makes more sense. You young millennials, or old Gen Z. Yeah, so like, yeah, anytime there's a printer somehow involved in like a TV show or a movie, like Office Space, like it was always like frustration, banging the printer or breaking it apart with a baseball bat. And so HP was looking to kind of repackage that, right, and have people see it differently. So this ended up being a mashup in a way, a mashup between a printer and furniture. Like any mashup, it kind of falls somewhere on a spectrum, right? And I think we probably still look too much like a printer. We ended up in our design. In my opinion, I think we should have like really hid the printing part. So it was just like furniture that just happens to print. You don't even know.
Like, why is my table making noise and vibrating slightly?
Exactly. That's the way I wanted it, and I think that the whole design team wanted it. But in any case, I use that example a lot because it's kind of a classic industrial design example, right? Point being is that, the things we design, they have souls, they have identities, and those identities can shift. It's up to us to kind of guide that, right, in the right direction for whatever, the reason might be, for the context or the audience, the people who use it. And so through that lens, I see a lot of parallels, to being transgender. It's, of course, not everything adds up. It's not a perfect parallel. And I don't want to offend anyone by comparing being transgender with, designing objects, right? But for us nerdy folks in the room, I think it's pretty neat.
Yeah, it's a good allegory for reminding us as people and about our work and what we do, that we as people and the objects we create don't have to be like locked down and weighed down by what society has prescribed thus far.
Yeah.
Printer is one thing in the eyes of society, and we can break it free from that.
Exactly.
Maybe make the printer a little happier.
Yeah, exactly. And that's right. I'm glad you said that, because that's kind of the whole point, right? It's like, so at the end of the day, I mean, we did all of that just so people would see printers in a new light. And I think that's about acceptance, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we go back to like this new lexicon of trans language, I mean, that's someone who, I don't know who's coming up with this terminology, but I want to meet these people.
Sounds like you should help. I think that you'd be good at it.
I would love to do that, because I don't think it's perfect. And we know as designers, no design is perfect ever. Because honestly, like, it's huge improvement since when I was younger, with all the gross terminology. But now I was most excited about just having something to call myself, where I was like, okay, yeah, I think this most closely represents who I am, but not completely. And so I was like, I guess I'm a little bit of this, a little bit of that, like a little gender fluid, but also kind of trans femme, potentially trans woman. I have like potential trans woman vibes maybe in my future. And it's different for everyone, right? Like, some people want to like shift from one extreme to the other, right? So either from, a cis man to a cis woman, I guess technically be a trans woman, but I think, or vice versa, right? But I think they really want to be considered like women or men. And so that's one path. And then there's so much variation in between, right? It can be confusing sometimes with the new terminology, and trying to figure it out. And then I think it's easy to like get so wrapped up in labels too, that it can be a little bit disorienting. Just trying to like find that perfect label. But I will say, like, I mean, it was just a huge revelation for me, even though it's not a perfect naming system, it did its job, let's say.
It gave you enough of the tools to at least start like digging in on what mattered to you more and identifying it for yourself, it sounds like.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
And I'm sure in like a couple of years at time, like, they're going to come out with some other, I'm sure on TikTok, like they've already
These
come out
magical
with
they who's coming
yeah,
up with the
they've
word.
already come out with exactly. But that was the interesting thing too, is like, and I kept having to remind myself when I was like getting so absorbed and wrapped into this. I was like, yeah, I'm just Joey, like I've always been this way. It's just now that I'm like kind of saying, okay, they're presenting to me this fresh menu of terminology, and I'm picking and choosing, like, but that doesn't change who I am or who I've always been,
Mm-hmm.
It's just a label.
That also might be this part that you've been drawing all your life, and suddenly someone else did the linguistic job for you that maybe you just would never do for yourself, because it's like the visual brain versus philosophical brain, which apparently kids on TikTok have right now.
But it helps. The terms sometimes when someone else makes the term or introduces it, it's like permission to be Joey, right?
Yeah.
Permission to be Kate, permission to be Margaret, permission to be Ginger.
Exactly.
I don't need permissions.
Margaret doesn't want your permission.
No, you've never needed anybody's permission
I like
for anything,
that.
Margaret.
That's awesome. That's even better.
Something we've been talking about a little bit, amongst ourselves, or I think even with you, is like, yeah, how designers have this job of representing people that are not in the room. Like, we're very, very good, hopefully, at like listening and trying to be inclusive of everybody's needs and perspectives. And yet weirdly, we're like off in a very singular way of representing ourselves, or like what a designer is
We're in
supposed
the
to
design
be.
echo chamber.
Yeah, like I think designers also get put into a box like of, you have to always like look really aesthetically perfect when you show up anywhere. You have to like think in a very singular way. I think it's really great to be like women in this field, and I think it's even like more special maybe to be a trans person in this field that is like able to shake up the identity a little bit. It seems like it gives a lot more perspective for making products that are actually like more varied, but also for like claiming creativity in a different way. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, thinking back to my original comment when we first started, like, I would choose to be on radio than TV. I think because we're able to focus on the content more and not get hung up on the visuals, right? And the way we see ourselves. Well, voice, it becomes about voice, right? So who has the most soothing voice, which is an aesthetic, kind of, I guess, multisensorial aesthetic. I know what you're saying. It's hard to break out of these uniforms, in like, especially in our field, like a lot of fields, and well, let's just focus on ours. I mean, it's male dominated and, very heteronormative. And to deviate from that comes with a set of challenges, that I feel like maybe it's because now I've been so like in my own world, like I almost feel like I've lost touch with what it's like in companies,
Mm.
I'd be curious to hear, some of your experiences and things you've observed. But I feel like nowadays things move so fast. I don't know. I feel like it's becoming not only just accepted, but it's almost an advantage, or I don't want to say advantage, but like it has a particular strength of standing out and having, and maybe it's because I'm all about, turning our struggle into a superpower, or turning a struggle to a strength, right? I think sometimes struggle can have its own advantages, and being in a position where we don't fit in kind of the norm, the expected archetype, because I did fit that for the majority of my career. That's kind of the interesting thing. I got the advantage of being on the other side, right? Of fitting in. Well, not completely, but like looking the part. And I think I mentioned this in our other call, but I'm, pretty introverted and not like Don Draper charismatic style. I'm like, whatever, I don't know. Let's just put it this way. I was never on the fast track for getting promotions, right? So I just kind of like had my talent and creativity, and was not necessarily the most client facing, like, in terms of leading conversations and being like the type A, like I'm going to be the partner at the firm kind of track, right? I was just like talented, creative, and they wanted to keep me around. So I would just keep pumping out ideas for them, and I was sort of put in that.
You're the Peggy, which is way cooler, honestly.
yeah, yeah, exactly. That's right. That's right. Good.
What a better character.
Good reference. That's right. And she, yeah, she's great. But that's where I always kind of fit. And I think I got so frustrated because I tried so hard to mold myself into being a Don Draper, because I feel like I had to be in order to like advance, and that's what you had to do. That's what successful people act like. But I just was like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, and because I'm good at what I'm good at, and I don't really like trying to be someone I'm not. I've never been a good salesperson either. Like I used to have a part-time job in design school selling shoes. I wanted to get some experience, on the ground floor in retail.
Gotta handle those shoes.
That's right. And I was so bad at selling shoes. I would almost talk people out of buying shoes because I would get so existential with them. I would go so deep like introverts do, and I'd be like, "What do you need the shoes for? What do you really, like,
oh, this is the best. I wish we had footage of you doing that."
And like, and my boss at the time, this old shoe salesman, been around the block, he was like, "What are you doing? Like, you have to, like, what are you got to sell shoes, like, so that's what I hired you for." I was like, "I don't know, this is how I interact with people."
Oh, that's so funny.
And that's not to say I didn't learn things and improve kind of my professionalism and just whatever things that we all can learn and grow from. But yeah, my point being, like, at the end of the day, it just wasn't going to work, and I think, getting back to your original question, I think there's a strength from having self-awareness and realizing when things are clicking and when things aren't, right? And when they aren't, then maybe it's time to like look elsewhere and finding another path that's probably a better one. And I realized too, like for me, I just wasn't cut out to climb other people's ladders. I have to build my own ladder. That's it. However small the ladder is, it doesn't matter. Even if it's like a little step stool thing, it has like one rung, and at least it's my ladder that I made, and that's awesome. I'd rather have that than trying to, I don't know, girl boss my way to the top, because I can't do that. That's just
Yeah.
not me.
There's definitely a strength in being like a little bit on the outside. I feel a lot of empathy towards like all the cis men out there who are trying so hard to be Don Draper, and it's like a horrible fit for them, even if they
Yeah.
are cis men, you know?
Totally.
When you just get like pushed out, or it feels like too much of a dissonance in your identity, like, and you have to find a different path, that path might be way more interesting or liberating, or like show you things you can do and make that are really special.
Yeah, exactly. And it's true, I think now that I'm on the other side of things, like with my own, my journey here and out of the darkness, let's say. Yeah, it makes me so appreciative to have been an outsider, or at least never felt like I quite fit in. But again, I acknowledge like my privilege, having had the advantages of looking the part and capitalizing from that. I'm sure it helped, absolutely, but not necessarily the personality, let's say. So I'm so grateful actually now to have had my outsider voice take over the steering wheel and guide me, in the direction I was supposed to go in, and not just be miserable, still trying to climb someone else's ladder and fit someone else's identity, that's not mine, because it just ends up like life's so short and our energy is finite, and our creative energy. It's so much better to put it towards something that can amount to, true meaning, helping people and things that we really care about. And I think it's hard to do that and also make money, right? And it's hard to like have those things align. I'm still finding that to be challenging too, because no one's paying me to, right now anyway, to think of like, oh, well, how do I write a book about, what is this book about trans and design and whatever else, and topics that are like, meant to really help people. So for now, whatever, I do on the side take on more traditional industrial design projects with startups and different companies, but I try to take on the most meaningful ones that I can, with people that I really think are good people. So it's a sliding scale, but I think at the end of the day, the aspiration is to have those two things align to get paid for the meaningful work. So
Definitely. Joey, we're super excited to ask you our signature questions.
all right, let's hear
We
it.
really love to ask everyone, what it is that they as a designer bring to the world that only they can do. And we've talked so much about turning struggle into strength. We've talked about standing out, being who you're meant to be in your profession, and how that guides you. When you're climbing your own ladder, the Joey ladder, and you're on your way up, what are you bringing to the field that no one else is going to bring?
I think honesty, we talk about honest design. That's always the thing, like, oh, it needs to be an honest design. We need to use honest materials. I think honest design can expand, right? And have a broader meaning, being an honest designer, honest with ourselves and honest with not just the people we design for, but like who we are as people, where we come from, culture, and not just fitting into the binary or this like the modernist, like minimalist aesthetics of the Eurocentric, blah, blah, blah. Right? Like the thing I'm going to bring, is just honesty, just being myself. And maybe that's the most I can give, because to the field and to whoever knows me, because, it's, I think that's what it's about, is just existing in a way that, it's being true to ourselves and just actually being yourself. That's what it comes down to. I think we're all told since we're little kids, just be yourself, just be yourself. How many times have we been told that? I was thinking about this recently, like how hard it was for me to actually do that. It's taken me half, like whatever, almost 40 years to just finally be myself. And that's pretty profound. I just, when I realized that, I was like, oh my God, wow, that's just like crazy. And now that I have, it's like, there's no going back, like I'm all about just honesty. So yeah, when we talk about honest design, I want to look at it differently now.
Absolutely.
All right, Margaret, you're up.
Time for the signature question, and I hope for an honest answer. Joey, what is your favorite color right now?
My favorite color? Oh, that's a very personal question, but I want to say yellow. Yeah, I like yellow.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, it was easy. We take it.
Okay.
Well, it was wonderful talking to you today. We learned so much, not only about design, but also your journey and figuring out the identity and gender. I'm happy how much we talked about design, because I think we were all a little bit shy to make this episode too much about you and like gender topics and kind of abandon design. But I'm like so glad that we talked so much about all your career choices and how it all blended with discovering who you really are, and especially that the key to get back on the design path was connected with like you going through this incredible journey, standing for yourself and bringing your honest identity to the front and like living it to the fullest, and how it also helped you finding the joy in being designer again.
Thank you.
I hope that it will be a good, I know, like a good motivation for some of our listeners to like just don't hide and don't shy and go with who you really are, and know that like, yeah, your work is connected with it, and what you can do with creativity has a lot to do with where you are from and who you really are.
Let me just say one more thing. When I thought about this quite a bit over the past few months, but I realized my best design that I've ever produced was accepting myself and coming out, making that post. And because I realized like, and to me, like, well, it's a matter of asking, like, what is design, right? What do we mean by design anyway? It's a story to me. It's communicating something of value to people. And I honestly think that alone, single-handedly, like probably helped more people than I could have ever helped with any product I've ever designed, honestly. And I'm not trying to say that as like some savior mentality thing. It's just the realization that just in one fell swoop, by doing that, it's like, wow, this is design.
Yeah, and sometimes you solve people's problem by bringing a product, but better if the product comes from the really honest place and with a story.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just talking openly.
Exactly.
Well, Joey, I'm so grateful that you came to talk with us. Yeah, just that you've been so willing to be open and how many people you are impacting. It's really exciting that you're on the beginning of this journey, and like so excited to see where you go with it. This book sounds really cool. Do you want to share anything people should be on the lookout for, or any way that people could get in touch with you if they would like to?
On the lookout for, it's too early to say. I'll get back to you on that one.
Sure.
But yeah, you can, follow me on Instagram, find me on LinkedIn, or check out my website, joeyzeledón.com.
And as always, we are with Seattle. We have the WID_Seattle Instagram and beyondrightpodcast.com. So follow along, get the show notes on there. Margaret works really hard on those. And we will see you next time. Thanks, Joey.
Thank you.